lotus or half lotus. Oh, got it. Is that okay? Good. Okay, good. Fortunately, we don't have to either do full lotus or half lotus, but the benefits of full lotus and half lotus are like, I'll try and show you here. If you're in full lotus, or let's see. I don't know if you can see that or not. If you're in full lotus, the main point is that the down pressure on your knees is equalized by the the fact that your feet are resting on top of your thighs and pushing them down, right? Which is good. A lot of people can't do or don't like full lotus because it's hard, because they don't have the kind of twist that's required in their hips, right? Which is okay, right? Like, it's just something that people don't have to do a lot of in, when they're normally sitting in a chair and, eating dinner or working on a computer or something like that. So the fact of having the down pressure on your knees be equal and having a kind of evenly balanced tripod of support in your lower body is actually quite good. So I notice in back you've got support cushions under your knees. Exactly. If you can get a sense of having sort of evenly distributed support between your sit bones and your knees, that's really good, right? And then the other posture that people use that makes that possible, Katie is doing it, but you can do this thing called Seizo, which is just a variant on a kind of famous yoga posture, which I think is called the hero's pose or something like that. But anyway, that's good. The simplest way to do that is you just sit on your legs, right? And that's actually really excellent. The problem with it is that most people's legs fall asleep when they do that after 5 to 10 minutes or something like that. And once I did a tea ceremony in which I had to sit unsupported seiza for 3 hours, and it's amazing how asleep your legs can fall in 3 hours of sitting in seiza. It was like my legs had gone to another planet and were never coming back, right? So what people normally do is they support themselves either by sitting seiza on a bench or sitting seiza on a zafu or something like that, and that's excellent, right? And then I don't think anybody's there sitting in a chair, but you can have the similar feeling by, if you're sitting in a chair, planting your feet firmly on the ground and making sure that you have a sense of sort of being evenly planted on the earth by sitting in a chair, right? You don't want to be sitting so far back in the chair that it's sort of attracting you into a slouch, and you don't want to be sitting in a position where somehow the shape of the chair is pinching your sciatic nerves or something like that, right? So something like that. And then stacked on top of that, once you're grounded in that sort of solid tripodal lower body posture, then you want your upper body to just rise out of that in a way that's simultaneously energized and relaxed. And we've already talked about this, I think, but the one way to help with that is to have this sense that your head is floating up off your shoulders towards the ceiling, and the skin at the back of your neck and between your shoulder blades is sort of falling down your spine to towards the base of your spine. You can imagine, if you like, that there's a pillar planted in your lower abdomen that's supporting your that's pressing up against your sternum and supporting your sternum. That kind of works. The natural effect of that, plus this sort of visualization of your head floating up off your shoulders, is that your shoulders line up pretty evenly with your ears, and the feeling in your shoulders is a sort of relaxed out and down. And the standard hand posture is you bring your hands together like this, wrap your fingers into a circle, and then place that whole thing right down here at sort of against your lower abdomen, with your thumb tips up above your navel, and and the rest of your hand kind of hanging below your navel. And what that does is it frames this area in your lower abdomen that in Japanese they call the hara, right? That's the focus of attention for this kind of meditation, right? So I would say, once you're seated like that, bring your attention to your hara, and maybe put a little bit of tension in your hara. And what that means is slightly tighten your lower stomach muscles, slightly tighten your the muscles of your pelvic floor, and breathe out. Pause, and then let the breath come in. And do it again, maybe 5 times. Let the breath fall all the way out of the body. It's good to keep your eyes open and down, and your gaze soft. It's good to let your chin just rest lightly on this platform of muscle that wraps around your lower jaw, and have your face relax. When you've finished breathing that way about 5 times, just let the tension in your hara go, but continue to watch your breath from there, if you know what I mean. It's as though there's an eye in your hara that's watching you breathe in and out. So we're going to sit for a bit, and then I'll say a few things. the ancient instructions for Zazen, it says, this is actually a paraphrase of an even more ancient Zen story, but it says, think, not thinking. How do you think not thinking? Non-thinking. This in itself is the essential art of Zazen. So I think what you'll discover is that thinking will naturally occur. Thinking in the sense of conventional cognition will naturally occur. And any number of interpretations of what would be the appropriate effort in the presence of that will occur. To struggle with it, to banish it, to follow it and get lost in it, and so on. Right? The request, though, is something else. The request is to banish struggle, but allow whatever arises. That's all. Nothing. It's a kind of non-thinking. It's not thinking, it's just non-thinking. Maybe unthinking.
you'll find, I think, that you regularly, on some kind of mysterious schedule that nobody really understands, return to awareness and presence. And one of the sort of technical details there is that it's possible when you return to awareness of the body, awareness of the breath, awareness of the contents of your sensorium, the request is to delve in as deeply as you can to the activities and sensations, the thoughts and perceptions of that moment. And one of the things you may discover when you do that is that something about your posture has maybe slipped a bit or something like that. It feels different. It feels out of balance or funny in some way. And there's a temptation, I think, in that situation to kind of immediately fidget a bit, move it around. But I would say this: it's okay to move, it's okay to adjust, but you should allow yourself to really experience the nature of that sensation and what really dig into how it arises, what it feels like. And sometimes the sense of discomfort will just shift around and go away, and sometimes it doesn't, right? But the point is to really bring the focus of your awareness to that. And then if you discover that there's a way to ease it with a sort of deliberate shift in position or motion, then do it. It's okay. And watch what happens afterwards. The rubric for that is always be sitting. Always be forming your posture as though it's the first moment you sat down.
So I should ask, does anybody have any questions, comments, can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Other responses to what we just did? Any thoughts about that? Anything is fine. Posture, breath, mental framing, whatever. Yeah.
Just technical note for the room, Zachary's pinned, just like when we're streaming, your voice will go onto YouTube, but not your face. So just so you know. Yeah.
Cool. So thoughts? Great. Okay. So here's what I thought I'd say. So the this talk will resonate somewhat with the one I gave last week, but the there's in the history of Buddhism in China is extremely complicated, but and it also has this problem in that it ranges freely from total mythology to pretty accurate history and everywhere in between. And while there's actually a fair amount of literature that came out of Chinese Buddhism, and in fact, a lot of what we think we know about earlier Buddhist literature, like the Mahayana literature, exists actually mostly in translations into Chinese, which is kind of interesting. So they were, in some ways, much more, diligent recorders of the texts and so on than the previous few hundred years. Nonetheless, it's pretty murky. Right, and particularly the origins of it are pretty murky, and during the Song Dynasty, which is quite late in the history of Buddhism, so late 10th through the late 13th century or something like that, there was an effort to put together a literary corpus that would satisfy the following requirement. We want to make Buddhism an official thing, and we want to make it have a classical literature just like the other Chinese classical literatures, like the Taoist classical literature and the Confucian classical literature and so on. Right? And so, and they did it. They went and they slapped it together. And it's hard to know what their motivations were, but at least some of it had to do with the fact that the end of the Tang Dynasty, which was the period during which Buddhism, or particularly Zen, had kind of flourished in China, was kind of a bummer. It was a lot like Star Wars. Basically, there was a trade federation, and it got together with some really sketchy people, and they just went around and killed everyone. It was really, really bad. Only, they didn't do it with lightsabers. They did it in the old-fashioned way, but it was really hard, actually. And large portions of the imperial family got killed off, it was dreadful, right? And then the Tang kind of recovered, and one of the things that the partially recovered Tang Dynasty did was purge Buddhism from China, right? So there was I think because there was this notion that China had been corrupted by foreign influences and they needed to, get back to basics or whatever. I don't know what the political wrangling was. Lots of people write about this, but I'm not much of a scholar. But in any case, and after all that, when Buddhism became a permissible activity again, and people could live in monasteries and do all the rest of that sort of thing, everyone was like, man, that was really close. We almost lost it all. And the second thing they said was, let's make a literature. So they did, right? And the form of this literature, for the most part, is these formalized collections of stories about interactions between people, mostly teachers and students, but not exclusively teachers and students, as you'll see if in the case I'm going to read. And they're called essentially, well, in Japanese, koans, in Chinese, something like gong'an, right? Which literally means public case law. And I even have a book here. This is a like a courtroom drama novel that was written kind of in the Tang Dynasty and then translated by this guy Robert Van Gulik, and I think this translation dates from the late 19th century or something like that. But it says, the celebrated cases of Judge Dee, who was this famous Tang Dynasty jurist, and he gives a really bad spelling of the name in Chinese. It's Di Gong'an. So basically, it's the koans of Judge Dee, right? And so these are all exactly the same thing. They're koans, right? They're Gong'an, right? So they're essentially public cases at law, is what they're framed as. And they have the story. Well, they have an introduction. They have the story. And then the story has commentary, and then there's a poem that was written about it, and then there's more commentary, and then the translator usually has notes, and so on and so forth. So it's really a literature, right? And the people that collected these things were constantly saying that they didn't really care about the order of them, but it's pretty clear that they did. And this book, this is one of the most famous koan collections. It's called the Blue Cliff Record, and it was originally collected by this guy named Shui Do, and then recollected and commented on by a guy named Yuan Wu. And the very first case, the public case, is about an encounter that happened way back in the day between an early emperor in, I forget which dynasty, pre-Tang dynasty, and this guy, this famous, and I have to say largely mythical character named Bodhi Dharma, who came from India, or maybe actually from what we now call Pakistan, and somehow managed to get himself to China and start teaching. And he's credited as the first patriarch of Zen in China, although among the many things you can guarantee is that he never said the word Zen or Chan, right? Chan is the Chinese for Zen, right? It was not a thing, right? It only became a thing really when people were publishing this stuff, but he's still credited as the first patriarch, right? And so he goes to, and the story of his life is full of mythology. Like the weirdest part is, I think 3 years after he died, this advisor to the emperor was on a trip. He was going to Shaolin Monastery to see the emperor, who happened to be staying there. And he was walking down the road and he sees Bodhi Dharma. And Bodhi Dharma is walking barefoot down the road with a stick on his shoulder, and hanging from the stick is a shoe, a single shoe. And he's like, Bodhi Dharma, you're dead. Where are you going? He goes, I'm going back to India. And so the guy says, okay, well, have a great trip. And Bodhi Dharma says, don't mention that you saw me until you get to Shaolin. And so things will go very badly for you. So eventually this guy gets to Shaolin and he sits down and he says, I saw on the road, I saw Bodhi Dharma. And the emperor says, you're lying to me and you can't lie to the emperor, so I'm going to kill you. And but some stuff happens, and then some monks go out and back and they dig up Bodhi Dharma's grave, and they discover that all there is in it is a single shoe, right? And so that's pretty mythological, right? And I have to say, this story reads like mythology too, and I'll kind of explain why in a bit. But anyway, so here's the story. So Emperor Wu of Liang asked the great master Bodhi Dharma, what's the highest meaning of the holy truths? And Bodhi Dharma said, empty, no holiness. And the emperor said, essentially, well, it says here, who is facing me? But basically, that's like, who the hell are you, right? And Bodhi Dharma said, I don't know. And the emperor didn't really understand. And after that, Bodhi Dharma stormed out of the room, crossed the Yangtze River, and went to the kingdom of Wei, north of the Yangtze River, right? And there's a bunch of other stuff in the case, but I'm going to stop there. And say this, like, one of the reasons this reads like reads like mythology is that it's such a set piece, right? Like, clearly these guys, two guys, represent like philosophical qualities, right? So earlier on in their interaction, it's reported, not in this book, but in other places, it's that the emperor starts out by saying, hey, I'm this great Buddhist emperor, and I gave a lot of money to monasteries, and I've studied really hard, and all the rest of that sort of thing. Where's the merit in that? And Bodhi Dharma says, there's no merit. So the Emperor Wu kind of represents something about like conventional cognition and the conventional notion of effort and virtue, right? And Bodhi Dharma represents the ungraspable nature of reality, right? And ever since the advent of Mahayana Buddhism, those are kind of the two main kind of philosophical entities that govern the discourse of Buddhism, right? Of Mahayana Buddhism. Like, if you look at Theravadan Buddhism, it has a slightly different flavor, not completely different, but slightly different. There's a lot more reliance on conventional cognition and the kind of conventional notion of effort, right? Like the I think I've talked about this before, but the classic sutta in the Digha Nikaya that talks about the benefits of the contemplative life talks very specifically about what you're supposed to do and how it's supposed to feel and what the benefits are and what the benefits are not, and so on and so forth. It's very straightforward and so on and so forth. And one of the kind of motivating factors for Mahayana Buddhism in general was a counteract the kind of naive realism that arose out of that kind of thinking about practice, right? And also to counteract the nihilism that can happen as a reaction to it, right? And so the middle way that was established in Mahayana Buddhism is to hold up both of these philosophical entities, the conventional cognition and the ungraspable nature of everything, together, and to consider them not as it's absolutely not the case. I mean, if you read the commentaries in this book, you might believe that they're deprecating conventional cognition and effort, right? You might think they're saying, no, you just have to, I mean, because Bodhi Dharma, they make him look pretty good, right? And often people kind of, when they're interpreting this koan, they kind of disparage the Emperor Wu as sort of a dork. But actually, the Emperor Wu was not a dork. He was a smart guy, and he used his power and his riches to do tremendously beneficial things. And he invited Bodhi Dharma to come hang out at the palace and drink tea and talk about Buddhism, right? He was not a bad guy, right? And he was actually really sharp. And when he asks, what's the highest meaning of the holy truths? That's a standard question, and it has a standard answer. And the standard answer is exactly the answer that Bodhi Dharma gives. It's not like this is a, like non-Buddhist conversation, right? It's like, did anybody in this audience go to Hampshire College by any chance?
I went to Smith, which was near Hampshire College.
I went to UMass.
Mm.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Did you really? God, I went to UMass too, but also New Hampshire, which is, And okay, so then you might know what the motto of Hampshire College is, right?
No.
Really? No.
Thinking.
It's non satiscere, which is to say, to know is not enough, right? And I forget who invented that. One of the founders or something like that. Well, that's great. So you went to Smith and you went to UMass. Nice. Yeah, I went to Hampshire for undergraduate, and then I studied computer science at UMass, and then I went off and became an engineer. But anyway, so it's more like that. It's more like conventional cognition is great, and the conventional concept of effort is also necessary and great, but if you lean too far into conventional cognition, you fall into the traps that cause conventional cognition and the conventional notion of effort. You fall into the traps that have demonstrably and unarguably caused outrageous suffering since people had any idea of what they were doing, right? Basically, like if you look back at all the early literatures of the world, what are they mostly concerned about? They're why are we screwing things up, and how could we not be screwing things up, right? And that's what Buddhism. That Buddhism is just one of the many possible explanations and proposed solutions to that, right? So that's the problem with conventional cognition and the conventional notion of effort, right? And the assertion of the ungraspable emptiness of all being is held up as a kind of medicine for that poison, basically, right? But if you think you can engage this stuff without a conceptual framework to help you work with your experience, the general notion is that you're kind of fooling yourself, right? So both are required and important, and the truth is that you live, to the extent that you're a practitioner of mindfulness, meditation, et cetera, you're living your entire life and practice in the tangle between conventional cognition and the emptiness and ungraspable nature of all things, right? It's like the sort of unloaded receptive attention that arises when you can just be here without being self-concerned, right? Reaches in and fiddles with the conceptual framework that you're carrying, and your conceptual framework influences your behavior and thinking and your practice in a way that allows that emptiness and ungraspable nature of all being to manifest, right? So they're constantly interacting, and that's where we all live as practitioners, is in that tangle and nowhere else, right? So that's actually the highest meaning of the holy truths. So does anybody have any questions or comments about that? Because that's about all I have to say about it. Yeah, go ahead.
We were sort of just talking about this morning. We're taking this Tantra class, and we were talking about the difference between, that was this morning, right? Yeah, okay. So much practice. Between having a belief versus establishing like a view, like a practice context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What the difference is between those two things. So this kind of reminds me of that, of like,
yeah,
practicing in some kind of container, and maybe you're able via the practice to sort of get right access to the container, be able to see the container, and that's different from having like a concrete conceptual belief about like where your practice is going or what's happening in it or what the scaffolding is for it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And you know, here's how they interact. Like, so here's an example. You know, one of the, so when I started out practicing at San Francisco Zen Center, there was a head cook, and I used to work in the kitchen a lot. And one day he walked in, and he handed me this book, and he said, "You should be reading this." And then he walked away and cooked something, right? And so I started out doing that, right? And one of the things that shows up in it is this assertion. It shows up over and over and over again that everyday mind is Buddha, right? And you know, as a philosophical claim, that's intriguing and actually quite helpful, right? Because then you learn not to punish yourself for thinking. So you maybe take a more balanced view of it or something like that, right? But that's not the same as realizing in your gut and in the context of you know, kind of unloaded, receptive, unconstructed stillness, right? It's not the same as realizing the actual nature of that truth in your body, basically, right? But the recognition of it from an intellectual and philosophical perspective kind of helps, right? It's not bad, and it actually can give that experience a label, right? Which is also good because it helps you explain your experience, right? So yes, absolutely, I think that's right. Yeah, and it's worth thinking about the notion or the components of belief, right? So what are the components of belief?
Information and faith.
Exactly. Well, I would say information and conviction, right? Right. Like, conviction is an actual emotional construct that we enact all the time, right? And it's really worth paying attention to the ways in which conviction arises in your body when you're just walking around in the world, right? Because it's incredibly powerful, right? It can convince you to do things that are marvelously beneficial or horribly destructive and problematic, just based on your ideas about stuff, right? Which are, by definition, according to Mahayana Buddhism, kind of sketchy, right? So it's really worth paying attention to your conviction, right? But it's also when you and so this is where it gets complicated, right? Like, you know, like the thing that everybody's supposed to need in order to pursue a practice is way-seeking mind, right? You know, it's kind of a trope in most Buddhism, including Theravada Buddhism, right? What is way-seeking mind but some kind of belief and faith in the in that practice will somehow, you know, I'd say this, but kind of deliver the goods, right, or something, right? So, we kind of can't live without it, right? And we can't, and we wouldn't practice without it. What would convince any one of us to go off to a monastery and spend 15 hours a day sitting, right? Not much, right? Except that somehow some conviction that it would make life less full of suffering and difficulty and so on. And actually it turns out that it does, but it still requires a lot of conviction to get into it, right? And even better, not so much, well, I was going to say not so much, but maybe the same. All the major Zen schools exploit that conviction and actually stir it up, because when you're really convinced what you're doing is the thing, right, you're constantly running up against the limits of conventional cognition and the conventional notion of effort, right? And you're kind of banging your head against it, and eventually, and every time you bang your head against it, this opportunity arises to let go. And the first 10,000 times that opportunity arises, you don't do it, but eventually you do it, hopefully, right? And that's when it becomes possible to see the larger picture of what it actually means to be human, right? So does that make sense? Or anyway, yeah, okay. So, and anybody else? Any questions? So what should we do? We could sit a little more, and then call it a night, or we could call it a night, or what, you know, we can, there's not that many of us here. We could probably figure this out. What do you think?
Yeah, what do you guys want to do? It's 8. You guys want to
Yeah.
sit like 15, 20, and then call it? Cool.
Does that sound good? Great.
Yeah.
And,
So
okay.
20 and then we'll go.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I'd love to do that. Do you want to do a little bit more, you know, sort of yogic posture stuff in advance, or do you want to just pick up where we were and sit? Let's just pick up where we were, right? Okay. Good. These.
Oh, it's us. Oh, I wonder if when he took those out, can the AirPods like end the call?
I don't think so, but they might have stopped him being the speaker.
No, but he was pinned. Yeah, no, it's just us. Hi. Oh, he's back. Hi.
Wow. that was bad. Removing my AirPods was a bad idea. Okay, here we go now.
You should know that I have a cat that comes and sits around when I'm sitting in this space. It's really great, actually. Here, let me see if I can show you. There we go.
Oh.
He's really good at sitting zazen. We've worked out a number of positions that allow him to come and like plant himself on my knee while I'm sitting zazen. It's kind of good, actually. So, and I took him in about 4 years ago now. He was a neighborhood street cat, and he's become tremendously fat and kind of lazy, and he just sits around the garage and waits for me to come down and sit zazen with him. So it's kind of good, actually. Anyway, I'm really, really happy we got to do this, and I'm really sorry that I somehow mismarked my schedule, so I didn't think I was going to be there tonight. But I'm really glad that it worked out. So thank you so much, and have a good night. Take care.
So we're back. We're here next Monday, even though it's a holiday.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah.
then the following 2 Mondays, we're off because Zachary is going to go do a cool Zen thing.
Yeah.
And then we'll be back after that. So next Monday, if you're in town, be here. We'll all be here. Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. See you.